just in the last couple of days I've had a bad back, so standing without support for any time is not particularly easy. So I'm going to stand here and lean on the lectern. We know that this season is a busy time and there are lots of things and activities that are going on around us. As I've said before, many of them are good and something that are worthwhile, and many of them become almost a burden to us. So instead of being a blessing, this time of Advent, this lead up to Christmas, can almost seem as if it's really hard work. So our Advent series has been more about inviting us to have a move towards Thanksgiving. We've called it an attitude of gratitude. And I've even suggested that it has to be radical gratitude, something that we really choose to do, which is so much more inclusive. The theme of the series is actually, it's a wonderful life. And it's an invitation to see beyond what happens around us and to recognise that God really does bless us in great and wonderful ways. There are studies that have been done over the years that have shown very clearly that when people are grateful, then there is a sense of peace in their lives. Relationships in families are much better. Work situations can improve and our health can improve because they're not negatives attacking us. Because we know that when negatives start to become part of our story, then very clearly we struggle. One of the most important things to do then is just to pick up those 3 things that we can do and focus on them to help us grow in gratitude. The first is actually to look for things to be grateful for. It's not that hard when you're looking to find them. But if you're just wandering through life without looking for things to say thank you for, to give thanks to God for, then we miss out. And so that's why the second point is to actually recognise that it is in fact God who gives us these blessings. That it is God who has gifted us in a very beautiful and wonderful way. Each one of us individually, each one of us with incredible talents and gifts that may not figure large on the scale of the world, but they are particular to each one of us, and they're a blessing from God because of that. And we can make an incredible difference in our world when we use our gifts for the good of others. And the third is simply to practice gratitude. When we see people, to thank them. When we appreciate what is happening, to give thanks to God for them. And that makes an incredible difference in how we look and how we live. 2 weeks ago, we looked at some of the obstacles that we sometimes run into when we're trying to live our lives. We can have big problems that happen, and that's the background to the story of It's a Wonderful Life, the movie that is behind the theme of this series. The struggles with finances, the struggles with family, the struggles with all the things that go on around us can so weigh us down that we lose sight of what the blessings behind them are. Has anybody managed to see the movie since I've promoted it so many times? Not yet. But I'm not going to tell you the end then, because that would be spoiling the importance of it. But it's really about, there are so many blessings we receive, but when we don't see them, when we don't look for blessings in our lives, then our life can really seem quite difficult. And George Bailey, once he recognises where the blessings were and where the good things were happening, had a change of heart and was able to see very clearly that this is something very special. But we're not only looking at big problems, we also have little problems, the little things of each day. Things like family. We give thanks for family when they're going good. Why not give thanks for family when things aren't working out? And we can say, thank you, God, that I've got a family. Or when struggles, work and things like that happen and work becomes a real challenge, to give thanks to God that you've got a job. And when you're stuck in traffic, to give thanks to God that you've got a car. Just little things that behind the burdens that happen, there is a blessing if we stop and take the time to think about it. Last week, taking a leaf from Paul in his letter to the Philippians, we saw how he was looking at the people and saying thank you for this incredible gift that they had been to him and the support that they had given him during his journey and his missionary activities. And so I gave you some homework last weekend, and that was to write a letter to someone who has been a gift and a blessing to you in your journey, to say thank you to them for what they have done to help you to be the kind of person you are today. To recognise that without the support of family and friends and community, then it really is a struggle sometimes to just be able to be the best person we can be. But when we acknowledge and recognise other people and give thanks for them, there is something very powerful happens, not only in our lives, but in the lives of the people we thank. Today I'd like to go just in a slightly different direction, and it picks up basically the first line of the passage from Luke's Gospel that we hear today. When people come to John the Baptist and say, "What must we do?" he reminds them that if they've got 2 tunics, they must share one with someone who has none. If they've got food, to give that to someone who has nothing. And so it's a sense of saying this is not only just about gratitude, but it's also linking it to giving as an expression of our gratitude. To be able to say that because I have received, therefore I share. I remember Sam Clear. Some of you may know Sam, a Tasmanian, who before the World Youth Day in 2008 walked halfway around the world from the west coast or the east coast of South America across to Santiago de Compostela. And Sam made a comment along the way that the people who were the poorest were the ones who were most generous in supporting him and giving him food and accommodation. He said the people who lived in prosperous places tolerated him in many cases, but it was the poor who moved out of their room, their little tin shed, and who gave him food for the day. If we have something in our lives that says, I can give to someone, then we are beginning to understand what the gospel message is about. John was challenging the people to have a change of heart. He was encouraging them to not just be people who did what was required. They were to be people who were generous in their response to others. He was calling them to have a new heart, to prepare a way for the Lord in their lives. And it wasn't just going to church. It was about living something much more. And he was challenging them and saying, you can't just do the good things. You've got to do the great things. I don't in any way suggest that we're like that, but I wonder whether in our world today, the majority of people who no longer have an understanding or a practice of their faith have that sort of situation because they've only ever been head Catholics. That the story of God's love has never really touched their hearts. I was listening to a podcast yesterday. David Dean, who's now a professor of theology in the United States, born in Ireland, was in Ireland when Pope John Paul II went to a place on the west coast called Clonmacnoise, one of the ancient monasteries of Irish tradition. And there were 1 million Catholics at Clonmacnoise at a time when there were only 3 million Catholics in Ireland. And so everybody said how wonderful it was that there was this great outpouring of faith. And he may just ask the question, he said, what was happening in Irish society at the time was that there was this cultural response to Pope John Paul II. There wasn't a faith response. And I wonder whether in our society today, there is a head response. We might have a rejection of the gospel message, or at least a rejection of church and rejection of practice of the faith, because people have never really had a heart relationship with God. And that's what John was calling the people to think about. He wasn't just telling them, get your act together because you'll be judged, but he was really saying, turn your hearts around and come to God. Turn your hearts around and express what that means. And one of the ways in which our hearts can be broken down and made anew is when we're no longer concerned just about self, but our concern becomes others in our community in need. And that's why that link to giving is an important part of what we're talking about this weekend. We have the St Vincent de Paul appeal for hampers for Christmas. We have the St Vincent de Paul Christmas appeal on the broader sense as well. It's one way that we can begin to look at how we care about those in need in our community. It's a way that we can reach out to make Christ's message of care for one another something very real and active. And I know many of you have already brought things and put things into the hamper baskets, and that's terrific, and probably you've done it somewhere else as well. But can I invite you, if you haven't, to think outside the square, to think of something that you could give to somebody else in order to give them joy at Christmas. And we know that it doesn't have to be something big, something difficult. It sometimes just needs to be something that you've thought about and you've cared about. Something that says, I am giving from my heart, not from my pocket. Because we all have something we can give away. It's really easy to put some money in a bin, in an envelope, or in a collection. But when it comes from the heart, something has happened to us as well. And that's what our Advent season is about. To recognize that gratitude is a gift from God that we then pass on to others. There's a passage in Matthew's Gospel that says to us to be gracious and generous to others as God has been to us. And that's what gratitude really is about, to care for others and to make that real. So I invite you to consider what you can do this Advent season to gain a sense of gratitude because you dare to give, and remembering that it was God who gave to us, and that's what makes the difference.